A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes were fixed on the presidential limousine as it wound its way through the streets of Dallas, carrying within it the hopes, dreams, and security of an entire nation. But in the shadowed underbelly of those bustling streets, where autumn leaves swirled like forgotten confessions, the wind carried a different tune, a dirge for a nation's innocence. For on that day, November 22nd, 1963, a chapter of American life was about to close, giving way to a long and somber night. John F. Kennedy rode in the back seat, his charismatic smile a beacon amidst the sea of waving hands. Yet beneath that easy grin, his soul was a battlefield. The weight of the world, the chill of the Cold War, the heat of civil rights, all pressed down on him like a shroud. Even in this motorcade, meant to be a display of strength, he felt the fragility of it all, the ease with which it could turn to dust. He was young for such heavy thoughts, but age was just a number when the burden of the free world rested on your shoulders. He was more than just a president. He was a symbol, a living, breathing promise of a better tomorrow, and the crowds loved him for it. But what did he truly feel as he waved back, his heart soaring with the elation of the moment, or sinking in the knowledge of what lay ahead? Beside him sat his wife, Jacqueline, elegant as ever, in a pale pink suit, her perfectly coiffed hair a beacon of style. But behind that flawless facade, her heart was a maelstrom of emotions. She adored her husband, admired his dedication, his idealism, but she also knew his flaws, his doubts, his struggles with the demons that plagued his sleep. In this moment of adulation, her thoughts drifted to their lost children, to the empty crib in their home, a constant ache in the landscape of her heart. She forced those thoughts away, focusing on the cheering crowd, trying to lose herself in the moment, for in those few precious seconds, there was no Jackie, no Mrs. Kennedy, only Jacqueline, wife to the president. Up ahead, Governor John Connally sat with his wife in the front, his arm slung casually around the small of her back. He was a jovial host, eager to show off his state, his city, to the leader of the free world. Politics aside, he liked Kennedy, admired his grit, his determination. But even in this atmosphere of forced camaraderie, the governor couldn't help but think of the weight of history that separated them. The countless decisions that would echo across the annals of time, decisions that might just shape not just their lives but the course of the entire nation. Unbeknownst to them, their fates were intertwined, bound together by a cord of destiny. Meanwhile, in an unassuming warehouse on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, Lee Harvey Oswald sat poised with a rifle. To the outside world, he was just another cog in the machine, another disgruntled employee. But inside that cluttered space, a storm was brewing, a storm of anger, frustration, and disillusionment. His mind was a battleground of conflicting ideologies, of Marxist fervor and the harsh realities of his life, of dreams that had turned to dust. He had once been a promising young man, a Marine with a respectable discharge, a man with hopes and aspirations, but life had dealt him a cruel hand, forcing him into the shadows, turning him into a drifter, a man without a home, a man without a purpose. He had defected to the Soviet Union seeking a new life, only to return disillusioned, bitter and lost. The rhythmic tick-tock of the clock was the soundtrack to his thoughts, each second echoing the emptiness of his existence. He had tried to escape that emptiness in the arms of 2 women, but both marriages had crumbled, leaving him more isolated, more desperate. Now he found himself trapped in a dead-end job, surrounded by mountains of books that mocked his own unreadiness, his own wasted potential. His hatred for the establishment ran deep, a potent cocktail of resentment and disillusionment. It was a feeling he understood all too well, the feeling of being trapped, of being overlooked, of being forgotten. And in that moment, he decided he had nothing left to lose. He would make headlines, even if it meant making them from behind the cold steel bars of a prison cell. As the motorcade approached, his finger tightened on the trigger, his eyes unwavering, focused on the target ahead. He was just a nobody with a rifle and a grudge, a nobody about to make the whole world remember his name. Outside, the crowd roared its approval, oblivious to the shadow lurking above them. They waved their banners, they cheered their leader, their voices a cacophony of adoration and support. But above the din, a single gunshot shattered the afternoon calm. It was a sharp, sudden crack that seemed to pierce the very heart of the city, a single note of discord in a symphony of cheers. The crowd looked up, confused, their smiles faltering for a moment, before the full weight of what had happened crashed down upon them. John F. Kennedy clutched at his throat, his face contorting in surprise, his hand coming away smeared with crimson. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the president slumped forward in his seat, his eyes wide with shock. Jacqueline screamed, her nails digging into her husband's arm, her eyes searching frantically for the source of the commotion, for the reason behind the sudden silence. Her perfect facade crumbling away, revealing the terrified woman beneath. Governor Connolly stiffened, his arm jerking as something hot and wet blossomed on his chest. He looked down to see blood seeping through his suit, staining it with angry red strokes. Pain lanced through him, but it was quickly eclipsed by a dawning horror as he realized what had happened. Oswald lowered his rifle, his face ashen, his hands trembling slightly. Adrenaline surged through him, quickening his pulse, making his breath come faster. His eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape, a way out of the nightmare he had just created. In that brief moment, the weight of his actions hit him, the finality of it all. There was no turning back, no undoing what he had done. He had made his mark on the world, but not in the way he had imagined. Secret Service agent Clint Hill raced after the presidential car, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind screaming at him to go back, to stay in the safety of the motorcade. But duty called, and he answered without hesitation, leaping from the car, scrambling up the steps leading to the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. He burst through the door and raced down the narrow corridor, adrenaline fueling his every step. The image of the stricken president seared into his mind. He had to get to the president, to do something, anything to help, to fulfill the oath he had sworn to uphold. But on the grassy knoll overlooking Delhi Plaza, a lone figure watched the motorcade disappear round the corner, a ghost amidst the cheering crowds. His name was unknown, his face unseen, his motives a mystery even to himself. Was he just a bystander, a curious onlooker drawn to the spectacle? Or was he something more, a conspirator, an accomplice in the unfolding drama? As the echoes of the gunshot faded into the Dallas afternoon, the crowds began to stir, their voices laced with confusion, their faces etched with concern. What had happened? Why had the president clutched his throat? Why had he slumped in his seat? The questions swirled, but there were no answers to be found. Only the growing realization that something, somewhere, had gone terribly wrong. And as the news spread like wildfire, the country held its breath, waiting, hoping for a miracle that would never come. The wound in the president's throat was mortal, a single bullet tearing a hole in the fabric of the nation's hope. The crowd surged forward, their voices rising in a wave of panic and confusion. People fell to their knees, others screamed, their faces ashen with fear. The cheerful atmosphere had evaporated, leaving behind a thick miasma of apprehension and dread. The motorcade sped away, sirens wailing in the distance, carrying with it the hopes and prayers of a nation. In the hospital, doctors fought valiantly to save the president's life, their faces grim, their movements swift and precise. Time ticked by, each second stretching into an eternity. The crowd gathered outside the hospital grew larger, their hushed whispers a constant background hum to the rhythmic beeping of the machines keeping the president alive. Every cough, every twitch was scrutinized, every glance exchanged a flurry of emotions. The country waited, the world watched, and the hospital became the epicenter of a nation's anxiety. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the land, the news came, the news no one wanted to hear. President Kennedy was dead. A collective gasp, a sob, a stunned silence fell over the crowd. The weight of those 3 words, "The president is dead," echoed in the hearts of millions. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a somber farewell to a leader who had touched the hearts of millions. The crowd dispersed slowly, their faces etched with sorrow, their eyes downcast. Some wept openly, others struggled to contain their grief. That day, the innocence of a nation had died, leaving behind a legacy of grief and unanswered questions. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who had pulled the trigger, sat alone in a cheap motel room, a fugitive on the run, a ghost in the shadows. Newspapers with his face on the front page lay scattered on the floor, each headline a fresh reminder of the nightmare he had unleashed. He had acted alone, so he claimed, but the echoes of doubt lingered in the minds of many. His story was a puzzle with missing pieces, his motives shrouded in mystery, his past a labyrinth of secrets. Oswald, the nobody, had become everybody's enemy, a symbol of hate, a face of evil. But in his isolation, he was more pitied than feared, a tragic figure consumed by his own demons, forever remembered for the darkness he had brought into the world. Across the country, in the hallowed halls of the White House, John F. Kennedy's brother, Robert, stood before the grieving nation, his voice heavy with sadness, his words echoing the shared grief. The family had lost a brother, the nation a leader, the world a beacon of hope. And as he spoke, the tears on his face mirrored the tears in the eyes of millions, binding them together in a sea of sorrow. America mourned the loss of a Camelot, of a dream, of a future that had been stolen. The nightmare had become reality, and the sun would never shine as brightly again. In the immediate aftermath of the fatal shot, John F. Kennedy was still alive. As the motorcade sped away from Delhi Plaza, the president's medical team scrambled to save his life. Meanwhile, Lee Harvey Oswald made his way to a local theater and watched the news unfold. We interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you this breaking news bulletin. President John F. Kennedy has been shot. We go now to our man in Dallas, who is at the scene of the assassination. He has just come from Parkland Memorial Hospital, where the president was taken. Doctors there were unable to save him, and he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. As the news of Kennedy's death spread, shockwaves rippled across the nation. In Washington, D.C., First Lady Jackie Kennedy was informed of the tragedy and immediately took action. She famously put on a stylish pillbox hat and suit, determined to appear composed despite the turmoil within. At Parkland Hospital, the focus was on the president's health. Dr. Malcolm Perry, one of the attending physicians, later recalled the frantic efforts to stabilize the president. "He was brought in lifeless," said Dr. Perry, "but we worked feverishly trying to revive him. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain." JFK had sustained fatal injuries and was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, as the doctors battled to save the president's life. Secret Service agents rushed to secure the area around Parkland Hospital. They quickly detained several suspicious individuals who had gathered near the hospital, but none were found to be involved in the assassination. Meanwhile, at the Texas School Book Depository, Lee Harvey Oswald calmly walked out of the building and hailed a taxi. When the driver asked if he should turn on the radio to catch the latest news, Oswald replied, "No, it's too painful." He then gave the driver an address in downtown Dallas and instructed him to drive slowly. When the taxi arrived at its destination, Oswald paid the fare and began walking away. At this point, he was wearing a pair of round, wire-rimmed glasses, which he removed and tucked into his jacket pocket. Moments later, he discarded his rifle and walked into a nearby department store. There, he purchased a 6.5mm handgun before returning to the street. By now, the news of President Kennedy's death was spreading like wildfire, and people began gathering in the streets to mourn. Oswald, however, seemed oblivious to the growing crowd and continued walking. He passed by the Texas Theater, where he would be captured later that evening, and headed towards a boarding house run by George Senator. Oswald had been staying at the boarding house for several weeks and had given his landlady a key to his room. However, when she went to check on him, she found his bed empty and his door slightly ajar. It seemed as though Oswald had fled the scene of the crime and was now hiding out at the boarding house. For the next few hours, Oswald remained holed up in the boarding house, while the city of Dallas descended into chaos. People were running through the streets, sharing rumors and trying to make sense of the tragedy that had unfolded. But Oswald was not concerned with the commotion outside. Instead, he spent his time cleaning his handgun and sharpening one of his hunting knives. Meanwhile, Secret Service agents were closing in on the boarding house. They had received a bulletin from the public, informing them of a suspicious individual matching Oswald's description, who had been seen near the school book depository. Now they were on their way to the boarding house, hoping to question Oswald about his whereabouts at the time of the assassination. When the agents arrived at the boarding house, they were met by George Senior, who informed them that Lee Harvey Oswald had recently vacated the premises. Despite Senior's insistence that Oswald was no longer there, the agents searched the house and found a hidden closet in the bathroom. Inside the closet, they discovered Oswald's rifle wrapped in a blanket, along with several boxes of ammunition. This discovery provided them with the crucial evidence they needed to link Oswald to the crime. But Oswald had already disappeared, and a massive manhunt ensued. As the search for Oswald intensified, the people of Dallas began to express their outrage over the assassination of President Kennedy. Many blamed the authorities for failing to protect the president and ensure his safety during the motorcade. Others began to speculate about the motive behind the assassination and whether there was a conspiracy involved. These theories would continue to circulate for decades, with some people even claiming that there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll. As the investigation into the assassination got underway, the Warren Commission was formed to determine the facts surrounding the death of President Kennedy. After a lengthy investigation, the commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating the president. However, many people disagreed with this conclusion and believed that there was more to the story. Despite the conflicting theories and unanswered questions, the nation began to mourn the loss of President Kennedy. His funeral was one of the most widely watched events in television history, with millions of Americans glued to their screens as they watched the solemn procession carry his coffin through the streets of Washington, D.C., and eventually to his final resting place in Arlington National Cemetery. As the years passed, the memory of President Kennedy continued to live on. People still talked about his charisma and the hope that he represented for the future of the country. And while the assassination of President Kennedy was a dark and tragic chapter in American history, it also served as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. Lee Harvey Oswald's capture on November 24, 1963, brought a sense of closure to many Americans. However, his subsequent murder by Jack Ruby 2 days later shocked the nation. Suddenly, questions arose regarding the circumstances surrounding Ruby's actions. Was he acting alone, or was he part of a larger conspiracy? What was his motive for ending Oswald's life before he could stand trial? These questions only added to the mystery and intrigue surrounding the assassination. The assassination of President Kennedy raised significant concerns about the safety of the president. Prior to this event, presidents enjoyed a high degree of protection, but the security measures were far from what they are today. The Secret Service, which had been responsible for protecting the president, faced scrutiny over its handling of the situation in Dallas. This event prompted major changes in presidential security protocols, leading to more stringent measures and a greater focus on anticipating and preventing potential threats. The assassination of President Kennedy had profound implications for the future of the United States. Kennedy was a charismatic and popular leader who had inspired hope for a better future. His untimely death plunged the nation into mourning and left a void in leadership. The presidency passed to Lyndon B. Johnson, who faced the challenge of continuing Kennedy's legacy while also dealing with the aftermath of the assassination. Johnson ultimately decided to run for president in his own right, marking a significant shift in American politics. The legacy of President Kennedy continues to live on in American culture. His commitment to public service, his courage in the face of adversity, and his ability to inspire hope and optimism continue to resonate with people around the world. President Kennedy's life and death have been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries, ensuring that his story continues to be told for generations to come. The assassination of President Kennedy was a pivotal moment in American history. It shocked the nation and the world, and raised fundamental questions about leadership, security, and the future of the country. The legacy of President Kennedy lives on, inspiring people to strive for a better future and to remember the importance of public service and the pursuit of justice. Now let's move on to the next part of the video. If you want to learn more about the intriguing details surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy, stay tuned, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates on historical events. In the muted glow of Warren Commission's hearing rooms, where fluorescent lights hummed like persistent doubts over stacks of testimonies and grainy films that replayed the horror in endless loops amid walls lined with maps of Dealey Plaza, veined with bullet trajectories like arteries of conspiracy, sat Chief Justice Earl Warren, presiding over inquiries into the unexplained gunshot. His judicial integrity fracturing under the pressure of national healing versus truth's elusive grasp. A man whose progressive legacy clashed with the expediency of lone gunman conclusions, torn between uncovering multiple shooters and the fear of destabilizing a grieving nation, conflicted between duty's call and the shadows of CIA withholdings that haunted his findings. Doomed to a report in 1964 that fueled decades of skepticism, until his 1974 death in quiet reflection. Warren, architect of civil rights rulings, wrestled with the single-bullet theories, contortions, visions, assailing him of Kennedy's head, snapping back in Zapruder's frame as if propelled by a grassy knoll shot, the image haunting eternally. Commissioners hunched over projectors, faces illuminated in pallid light as the film stuttered the second. Bullet's path debated like a riddle from the Sphinx's lips, echoes of dissent muffled by the majority's vote. Jim Garrison, New Orleans DA, pursued Clay Shaw in 1967 trials amid courtrooms dim with cigar smoke and the weight of public scrutiny. His prosecutorial fire clashing with the madness of obsession that alienated allies torn between justice for Kennedy and the paranoia that saw plots in every shadow. Fated to acquittal's defeat and a legacy of conspiracy films like JFK that immortalized his quest until 1992's end in controversy. Garrison, inspired by the unexplained shot, delved into CIA links, his inner war raging between evidences, scarcity, and convictions blaze, doomed to ridicule that shadowed his grave. Paul Landis, Secret Service agent, revealed in 2023 memoirs, a bullet found on Connolly's stretcher, questioning the single-bullet narrative, his stoic duty fracturing under memory's resurgence, conflicted between silence's oath and truth's imperative. Fated to a book's release that reignited debates in his twilight years. Landis, eyewitness to the spray-clutched fragments in the chaos, the image lingering. His form in Parkland's frenzy, bullet, glinting in palm like a forbidden relic, eyes hollowed with shock amid bloodied chaos that blurred the line between one shooter and two. Oliver Stone, directing JFK in 1991, sets where actors reenacted the shots amid reconstructed plazas lit by artificial suns. His filmmaker's vision clashing with historical accuracies, chains, torn between dramatic truth and factual fidelity, doomed to Oscar's acclaim, yet critics' scorn that haunted his career. Stone, fueled by Garrison's theories, wrestled with the grassy knoll's phantom, his tragic essence in films that polarized a nation. In 2025, forums dim with screen glow theorists debated acoustic evidence from dictabelt recordings, suggesting a fourth shot from the knoll echoes analyzed in labs, where waveforms danced like spectral signatures. Scientists like Donald Thomas advocating multiple guns amid peer rebuttals, their rationalism, warring against biases fated to inconclusive verdicts that mirrored the assassination's enigma. The second bullet's path magic, or multiple endured in myth's shroud. A baroque dirge of unresolved grief, characters' depths lost in speculation's abyss, emotional storms raging against closure's elusive dawn. As the years spun their intricate web, the enigma of the second bullet persisted, a silent spectre haunting the corridors of history. Its trajectory forever a cipher, its origin story a labyrinth with echoes of conspiracy and doubt at every turn. Yet within this enigma's heart, a profound truth echoed. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in our own reflections. And perhaps the most haunting truth is that the monsters we confront may be nothing more than ourselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for more historical tales.